What's up, everybody? I'm Jared Faber, and today I'm welcoming into my studio my good buddy Kenn Michael. Some of you out there may recognize Kenn from his role on the Parenthood, where he played Michael Peterson. What you probably don't know is that he was also writing the music for the show while he was on that show. Kenn and I met roughly around 1999 on the TV show As Told by Ginger. I was writing the music, and he was a voice actor on that show. And I'd say we've been good friends ever since. Really looking forward to sitting down with him. Yo! What's up, dude? Welcome. Let's do it. Come on in. You got some gear. I know you haven't been here. Kenn is an actor, a musician, a composer. If you check him out on IMDb, he's got multiple credits in pretty much every category you can be featured in: writer, producer, cinematographer. He's got I believe he has an Emmy win as a sound mixer.
Nomination.
He's done it all and legitimately so. So we'll just get into it, man.
Thanks,
Very
man.
excited to have you here. And
It's good to be here.
Let's go back to the beginning, man, because I know that you come from a musical family. You come from a creative family. Very early on, we're performing as an actor.
Yeah.
But take me back to the very beginning. You grew up in Connecticut.
Well, yeah, so my two dads, two moms, biological dad, jazz drummer,
Right.
Played with the greats. Biological mom, sang and danced with James Brown for 10 years.
Right. And your dad performed with Blood Ulmer.
Ulmer,
Willis.
Dizzy, Nina Simone. He's, killer. He's, and it's one of those things where growing up with a musician parent, it's just what's in the house. So you get very normalized to who they are as an artist, as a person, because they're just dad. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I would say I was in my mid-20s when I saw a drum solo that he did in Poland. And
I've seen it. I checked it out.
Yeah,
It's
and it was
on
one of those
YouTube.
things where it was like YouTube made that possible because he didn't have that footage.
Right.
So that footage just showed up, and my sister and I at the time were watching it. And we always knew that he was like a genius drummer, and we knew he's dad, he's brilliant composer, all that stuff. But again, like I said, you take it for granted. But I was watching him play and sort of separating myself out of, oh, this is my dad, I'm his son. It was more of like, how are you doing that? Mm-hmm. And then those were the questions, like, how are you're playing different time signatures on different hands, and you're not even really thinking about it. He's like, yeah, that's just, I don't really have to think about it. And it was just like, oh my gosh, so that was always awesome to be like, okay, that kind of caliber.
So did you see him hear him play a lot when you were a kid, or was
No.
that like that was out of the house?
That was out of the house,
Yeah.
because he was going to gigs. But you'd hear him rehearse. Mainly, it was more of hearing the composition that he was doing.
Okay.
Most of the times, he was kind of listening to the stuff that I was doing, and he'd be saying stuff like, you got to practice your scales, or practice your paradiddles and stuff like that.
But like when you're starting out, I mean, I'm talking about like when you're just a kid.
Yeah. That was what
even
it was.
before you're jumping in on
Yeah.
music, the music's around the house. Your parents are listening to music.
It was a weird thing because from my earliest memories, I was always into the technology. The tape recorder was my best friend. So my stepdad used to own a recording studio in New York City called Blank Tapes.
Right.
So this huge recording studio, tons of huge hit records were recorded there. And somehow, from a guy who admittedly didn't really like kids, was cool with me, and somehow understood that he could trust me with his multi-million-dollar studio. And so...
You're how old when you start getting around the studio?
4, 5. And I'm actually engineering sessions. He's telling his assistants, look, if there's a studio open and Kenn wants to get in there, set him up with what he wants. So I would have...
At 5 years old?
At 5 years old. So I remember having sessions where it was all pretty much analog instruments. They had, organ, piano, drums, bass, guitar, and it was basically about, you get the tape on the 2-inch machine, and as long as I didn't rewind it off of the reel, as long as I didn't go back before which was at a five-year-old, that was the scariest thing in the world because those machines are huge. It's gonna break, it's gonna break. So that was my biggest fear at 5 was rewinding back too far on the tape.
But what were you even trying to do musically?
It would just be like I hit record and I'd get on an instrument and I'd start playing something and I'd go back and I'd overdub and do something else. And so of course the layering and the overdubbing became that first musical that exchange of being able to layer sounds. But it wasn't until the digital stuff came in that everything shifted. And that was the biggest thing. So
how old are you? We're talking about what years? We're talking
so
about
now,
late 70s?
No,
late
so
80s?
this was like early 80s, so like maybe 82, 83.
Uh-huh.
So Lindrum DX7 changed the whole thing for me. Like that was it. So all I wanted to play with was the Lindrum 2, not the LM1, not the Prince machine, but the Lindrum 2, DX7, and I want to say there was a third thing that I'm trying to remember. Because I wasn't really too much into the analog synths. Mm-hmm. It was just all digital. Mm-hmm. So they got a 3324 Dash machine in the studio. And so Lindrum DX7 to Dash.
And for those who might be watching this who have no idea what a 3324 is, these
Right.
were some of the first high-end digital recorders.
Machines. Yeah.
And they recorded on tape. But it was
So
digital,
it was-
and they looked just like an analog.
2-inch machine, but it was 24 channels on a half-inch tape. And the reels were just much wider, and the whole thing was just flatter and more sleek looking.
And also, again, we're talking about a 6-year-old. Maybe.
Yeah. So
what were what was the music? What were you? What was around the house? What did you listen to? What do you remember liking at that time?
There was a lot of funk. The thing was, music was it was all music, no matter what. So I remember being exposed to Prince very early, because that was my mom's favorite.
Okay.
And I loved his music, didn't understand why he was screaming all the time. Didn't really get a lot of, for obvious reasons. I was 6, I was 7. So the things that stood out to me about his music was that mix of electronic funk, the drum machine sounds, that clap, that Prince clap. Oh my God. It was just, it was an amazing sound.
And at this time in your life, your parents are separated.
Yeah.
You're living in Connecticut?
I'm living in, at this point, it's Hoboken. So Hoboken, New Jersey, with my mom and my stepdad. We're going to visit my biological dad.
Right, so your dad lives in the city.
Yep.
Your stepdad's studio is in the city?
Is in the city as well.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to school in the city.
Okay. Oh, you were?
Yeah.
Where'd you go to school at that time?
PS11 and then PS6 for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade before we moved to Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
So
proper New York.
Super proper New York.
Okay.
So the funny thing is, I had a project, a 3rd grade class for book report. We were studying Greek gods or something ridiculous like that, and so I decided to do a book report, but I wanted to do a video on the story of Arachne. Mm-hmm. And so I made this video, which was essentially because at the time it was I was into the music stuff, but my stepdad, Bob, he'd gotten a video camera in the house. But it was one of those, it was like a video camera with a breakout box that was like a color time-based corrector, hooking up to a Betamax machine. The thing never went outside. We tried to bring it outside once and nothing worked. So it was stayed in the house. But I was fascinated with the visuals. And so while I was doing music and sort of studying audio and all that stuff, I was also getting into the video stuff. So putting these visuals together, putting some sound behind it. So I had this book report. I filmed it, and then I put some music behind it, some music that was composed at the big recording studio.
Crazy.
And so I turned it in. It was nuts. But the funny thing was, I turned it in, and my 3rd grade teacher was kind of like, "Oh, okay, I see what you did here. Technically, yes, that's impressive, but."
Where's your book report?
Yeah, exactly. Where's the book report? This is not really good enough. Go back and do it better.
Uh-huh.
And I did, and it was a big moment because it was I have all this technical excellence, but the content wasn't there.
Oh, she gave you notes.
She gave me notes, and they were good notes. I'll never forget her, Mrs. Birnbaum. She was fantastic.
That's set in motion a lifetime of getting notes.
Lifetime of getting notes. the bane of our existence
we
is
do.
composers. That's all it is. It's just sitting in a dark room, addressing notes.
Right. At anywhere along the way, did you take any music lessons?
Yeah, so the other big thing that was happening at that time was I was taking Suzuki piano. With Margaret Pine. So in my dad's building, Manhattan Plaza, New York, was a artist compound.
Yeah, that was the ones around 42nd Street where if you were an artist, you could get an apartment there. And
exactly.
Yeah,
so that's
all
so
kinds
that's
of people lived
so that's
there.
where my dad was.
Yeah.
And so growing up there, everybody's there. Just an awesome community. A lot of really awesome kids to grow up with because the parents
in the
were
heart
like,
of some filthy New York.
Oh, absolutely.
In those days.
My mom and my dad Warren found Margaret Pine, who lived in the building, to give me piano lessons because the way that Suzuki was taught was they teach you to speak before you learn how to read.
Right.
So it was all playing by ear, which for me that was how I spoke. So we ended up recommending another friend in the building, Alicia Keys, to Margaret Pine.
Oh.
So that was that connection. So it was great seeing her hosting the Grammys, and she did this big tribute to Margaret Pine, which was like amazing.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, so Margaret Pine was awesome, and so that was kind of like the beginning of the piano lessons and getting that classical foundation. What I liked to do as a kid was I would take these classical pieces that I was learning in piano lessons, and then I would go to the studio and work on, the emulator, which was that was the third thing, the DX7, the Lindrum, and the Emulator 1 by Uni Systems. It was basically like the first consumer sampler that wasn't the Fairlight. Very little controls on that thing. You recorded and you just played it back on the keys. But I would do electronic arrangements of these classical pieces. Practice playing them, but also like arranging and all this stuff. So
You got any of those today?
Totally, I have everything.
Wow.
I have everything.
I know you have everything.
Sound like real string players, don't they?
But I also have my crown jewel stuff, which is my most favorite electronic instrument of all time at that point in my childhood, which was bar none the most advanced, the synclavier. The synclavier.
You guys had one?
So Bob had.
Come on,
he
man.
got.
I had this.
I love this thing too.
And you had
this
a
thing was
synclavier.
amazing. So the synclavier. So Blank Tapes got a synclavier in, I guess, maybe 84, 85. And so I'm now 7 or 8. I taught myself how to use the synclavier. And I wrote my own little cheat sheet notes. And I would sort of store it in whatever little shelf they had. Turns out a lot of other producers were going there and they were looking at my cheat sheet notes because the manuals were just like these volumes of technical data. But the synclavier was my love.
Now, how old are you now?
Like 8, 9. And the thing about the synclavier was it was the ultimate musical workstation.
So now, by this time, if you're about 8 years old, have you started acting at this point?
So what ended up happening was, so here I am used to, I'm spoiled. I'm used to using literally the highest end equipment at my disposal as long as the studio's free, right? As long as nobody's, using it. And I wanted to have my own stuff. And my parents were like, well, I mean, what are you going to do to get it costs real money. And some kids at my school at the time were doing modeling and commercials. And I liked being in front of the camera, and I was like, that could probably work. That's going to work better.
So this was your idea, too?
This is my idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember.
And your mom was a performer. We'll just take a quick little detour.
Yeah. So she was a
performer.
She was a performer. Sang and danced with James Brown for 10 years. Went to school for theater and.
She went to high school performing arts.
She went to high school performing arts.
Did she go to?
My biological father also.
That's right.
Yeah. So they met there.
That's right.
So he was in the of course in music school, and she was a dancer, but I think she was going for drama because they were saying that this is her story, these are her words, because she had a big ass, something about like it wasn't going to work for theater or whatever, so maybe dance, or I'm getting it mixed up, but basically it was one of those things where, of course, when she started working for James Brown, all that stuff was a bonus, right? So the crazy thing about that is that you can see there's a movie called. What is it called? It's this movie about James Brown's concert in Zaire.
Right.
For the Muhammad Ali fight.
Right.
And so she's all in that music concert.
right.
And so that's always been.
I'm saying that's right, not confirming that what you're saying is correct, but that's right. As in, I think I remember seeing that and talking about that with you years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
And
nuts.
it's funny that I went to the same high school as both your parents.
Yeah, you guys have stories about James Moody and
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah,
Right,
it's
right.
just a super small world. And so that's why it's no coincidence, right?
Yeah.
So so she was a performer, and so when I was sort of like, I'm thinking about, I want to do this, and of course she's like, well, this is a huge time commitment. This is not something that you play around with. This is something that you really want to do. Well, yeah, I want to do this because I want to build my studios.
Man, so this is the first time I'm hearing this from you. I've known a lot of your story. I didn't
Yeah.
know that you went into acting so that you could get money.
So I could fund my gear addiction.
That's hilarious.
Right? So I was at my dad's house, and I was watching Reading Rainbow, and at the end of it, they were like, if you want to be on Reading Rainbow, call this number and audition. I was like, that's it.
Get outta here.
I'm doing this. I want to do this. And I told my dad, and he was just like, all right. So I went in an audition, and I got it, and I did. I ended up doing 2 Reading Rainbows. And at the end of the first one, I think the producer went to my mom or dad. I can't remember who brought me there, but they were just like, well, he's got like an aptitude for this. Like, he's good. He can do the lines. He's good on camera. He seems natural. He seems like he's having a good time. You might think about finding him an agent or a manager, that kind of thing. And that was kind of how that started.
Mm-hmm. Were you in any way like sort of bitten with the bug? Were you like, I'm into this? Or was it totally like focused on like, I'm going to get money?
Well, the thing was, like, all of that stuff was fascinating to me, right? From the aspect of, I liked performing. So that was one. But all of the technology behind that was just beyond fascinating. The film cameras, how sets are run, how commercials are shot, how movies are shot, how TV is shot, and then sound recording, and then it was all of the things that I was into: the technology, the creation, the creativity, performing, visual content. So it all fit. It all was just like right in that wheelhouse. Right. So as I, did tons of auditions and started booking things here and there.
How did you get auditions? Did you get an agent?
I think we found an agent, and so it was just taking the train into the city, into New York City, and just doing audition after audition after audition for weeks, months, and then starting to gain some traction, starting to get a little known in the business, being like, oh, there's he's done these things. And
did you did a bunch of commercials in these days?
Yeah, I was doing a ton of commercials. Okay. And that was great. And so that was, that's how I was making that money. So I was able to buy the things that I wanted to buy. And of course, the parents and the parentals were definitely instilling like, all right, well, if you're making this money, you're not spending all of it, and you don't have control over most of it, but here's what, you're going to have access to this. Okay. You have to use it responsibly. And if you're wanting to buy equipment, you have to give us a pitch. You have to pitch it to us.
This is my studio. This is what would be called a MIDI studio because it hardly has any tape except for my 4-track.
And then, of course, when I would get the stuff, my stepdad would do this thing where he'd be like, all right, you got a new piece of equipment. You're going to read the manual. I'm going to test you on the stuff before you're allowed to use it. So he instilled in me this whole idea of reading manuals was fun. Ended up working out for him because it
wound up working out for me because then I could call you and I didn't have to read the manual.
That's how it worked. That's how it worked. Well, that's what he did too, because he would buy new stuff and then he knew I would want to use it, and I would read the manual and I would teach him how to use the stuff. So,
but it sounds like right from the pretty much the beginning, there wasn't a specific focus on music. It was all of it.
It was all of it.
Did any of it trump any of it? Was music kind of the focus, and everything was like, or it was just all like, man, it's just there was almost no delineation between.
There was no delineation, and that was an interesting thing because at that time I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what I was. People are like, oh, you can be a film director, you can be a musician. You can be a composer.
Sure, people love to throw that at a little kid. Like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And you're like...
There's all these things, and I didn't know what it could be when you put them all together. I didn't really know.
Were you even thinking about what that might be in the future? Was there a point where you were like, oh, I got to figure out what I want to be when I grow up? Or were you just...
I wanted to be a rock star. That was kind of the thought, and for me, it was like, oh yeah, of course, sure.
Right.
Why not?
Well, so thus far, you're basically putting every wheel into motion as you have the whim. You know,
Yeah,
you're like
and
I think I want to be on TV. Boom, you're on TV.
Yeah.
I'm making records in, big recording studios or whatever it is.
And that was the interesting thing, because it was like I was very outgoing when it came to my acting stuff, obviously, just the nature of the beast. My music stuff, however, I feel was a bit more private. I remember there was this one time where I was actually offered a record deal. This was like, I wanted to say it was maybe early teenage years, and I was offered a record deal, and I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. I'm trying to think of what the deal was. And I remember my stepdad was like, "What?" And my mom was like, "If he doesn't want to do it, he doesn't want to do it. We're not going to force him into a situation that he's not comfortable in." I'm trying to think like what the deal was, but I feel like it had to be like, they're going to make me do a bunch of music that I don't want to do. They're going to make me do like
Or they're going to
stuff
package you.
Yeah. And I was not comfortable with that. I'm fine doing roles as an actor, but somehow the music stuff was a bit more personal and a bit more intimate. And ironically, I've shared way less of my music than I have of any other thing. My visual stuff, the music that I do share is usually through filmmaking. The filmmaking thing came when I auditioned for Spike Lee a couple of times for Mo Better Blues. And I was cast as an extra in a class scene. And he's up on a huge crane in the corner of the room, and they getting everything ready. And he yells playback, and the music starts, and the crane moves, and things are happening. And I'm like, oh, this is it. Like, everything is in this art form, this filmmaking thing. Like, I could do everything, all of the technology, the music, the acting, the filmmaking. It's all there. And I think that was like the first time that filmmaking as a concept was a thing, because at that time I was kind of making films. I'd bought myself a video camera when I turned 10 and taught myself how to edit and how to do, how to score to picture and how to do sound design to picture. And this is like, using SMPTE code and reel-to-reel machines, locking them with video decks. And it's still like expensive gear, right? This is all funded from my commercial stuff. But it was how I kind of learned how to make films. There was no YouTube. There was no...
And what about friends at this time? I mean, you had to have been essentially peerless. Nobody else could possibly be relating at 10 years old to the things that you were doing.
Not like that. But I had friends who were down to play. So I had friends who we'd make films together. So we'd go out and we'd shoot a bunch of stuff, and then I'd come back and edit it and score it and all that kind of stuff. But the fun aspect of being out in the field and capturing things, whether it be a little story or riding around on bikes in Connecticut and trying to do like chase scenes on rollerblades. And so, it was however I could get people to come in on the play aspect of it was a lot of fun.
Was there other, I don't know if it came before this, like, Boomerang.
Yeah, so that came before. So I'd done these commercials, and then I started booking some movies. I did the Super with Joe Pesci.
That was a proper role, right?
Proper role. That was my first movie. Actually, that's a lie. I was in Funny Farm with Chevy Chase.
Okay.
But they cut my scene out.
Okay.
So that was the first experience of the disappointment of,
how was that?
snap, it was devastating. And so I told all my friends, I'm in this movie, and they start playing the commercials. I'm in that, go see it. And that was the first time I was like, they can cut you out. You can do the work, but you might not even make the final cut.
And I guess I'm wondering, as this is starting to pick up and you're starting to be on TV and book, is there like an ego thing that's starting to kick in? Are you starting to see yourself in a different way? Are you different than the other kids who are not on TV?
Right. There's probably a little bit of that. Definitely in the deep ego, where you're not really aware, because my parents were very, very good at keeping things very, very real. They told me very early on, they were saying, look, all these people on the set are being very nice to you. All these producers and these directors are being very, very nice to you. They're saying all these very nice things. They're telling you you're amazing because you're making them money, right? By what you're doing on this set, they've chosen you to be this thing. Mm-hmm. You're part of this situation. As long as you're making them money, they're going to treat you like this.
Heavy.
When that stops, they're not going to be saying the same things. This is not real. And that was told to me very, very early on. So I kept that with me. So I don't think I sort of fell for the banana in the tailpipe where I think a lot of other people did, because this would be their social life, like,
Right.
you know.
And it also, it wasn't your aspiration wasn't to be the movie star or the kid actor.
Right. I mean, there was a bit of like, I wanted to be the rock star,
Right.
but I had more enjoyment on being a part of the process, and of course, the dreams of, I want to be able to run these sets.
You saw that early.
Oh yeah,
Amazing.
yeah. I remember. I just remember like being in class and, you know, doodling on. And I was drawing like Panavision cameras and
Right.
tape machines. Like, these are just, you know, all the gear. I was just such a gearhead. It was interesting because I went from, you know, going to school in New York, then going to school in Connecticut, and then, yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a thing. Like, I was that kid who was on TV, and some of it definitely felt different, but I was still just going to school.
Right.
Just like 13 now.
Okay. So now
So
you're,
now I'm
you're
like-
starting to be a
Proper teenager, and yeah, so I did a couple of movies, but I ended up booking a TV show that brought me out here for a little bit. It was a show on CBS called Tall Hopes, with George Wallace as the dad of his family, Anna Marie Horsford as the mom, and Terrence Howard as my older brother. I was maybe about 15 at the time, 14 or something like that, and it brought me out to LA for a minute while we were working on the show, and there was a lot of hype behind the show just because of what my character was on the show. I had all kinds of, it was just me as this character that got me a lot of attention from the show. Some production companies wanted to give me my own show, and so it was like really getting that next step of.
By the way, and I asked you earlier if you'd taken, you know, what music study you had done. Did you do any acting study?
Yeah, I did that too. Commercial study, scene study, like, you know.
Oh, and
there
you
was,
did some privates with James Moody,
did
right?
some privates with James Movie. Like, that's the thing. Like, my mom was very much about, you know, she was like, look, you're not gonna get to these levels and not be prepared.
Right.
You got to
I mean,
really know the craft.
I mean, the interesting thing about what you're talking about all the way through is like, it's all study.
Yeah.
Like, you're studying the gear.
Yep.
You're studying acting. You're studying music.
Yeah.
You know, like you're not coming at it at all just like, well, I'll try it.
And that was the thing. Like, I really, really loved that aspect of it. I mean, all the way from reading the manuals. I wanted to know how things worked inside and out. So I was out here for a minute, and
So you get a little heat on.
get a
you
little
now.
heat, get a little bit of that Hollywood experience where you know, you get some of that racism, you get some of that, you know.
How did that manifest at this
Well,
point?
so, you know, this is now 94, and here I'm this black kid who these different production companies are trying to sort of create a show around me. So you get the very, very typical stories. Oh, he's growing up in the ghetto and single mom. You know, just it's a very basic, like, okay, this could be any of those stories. But I had some very interesting parameters just because of who I was and how I came off. So I was sort of like the smart kid. So then they had to try and figure out how to write things about a smart black kid, which you would think like, oh, you just write about a smart kid, but that's not how you think. Like, oh, no, because black is different than normal. So,
By the way, is this the first time where that's starting to really resonate, or has that, you know, been a thing always?
It had been there, but I think it was acute when you start going into these meetings and you start listening to these
Yeah, they'll just
development
say it.
executives.
They're probably just saying it, right?
So,
and you're just like, what?
So I had a meeting with the Aaron Spelling's company, and this was kind of at the height of like 90210, Beverly Hills 90210, that show, Melrose Place. So we show up to the meeting, sit in this big conference room, and the head development guy comes in. You know, we're this little company, Spelling. We got this little show on 90210. I think you've probably seen it, Melrose Place. I said, yeah, I've seen the show, but I don't actually see anybody on that show who looks like me. He goes, well, yeah, no, we get that. We did have a black family on 90210 for a little bit, but I noticed that. What happened to them? Because they left. Nothing happened. Well, we didn't know how to write for them. They're people. Yeah, but okay. And that was most of what Hollywood was. So, like, for example, I was a director's apprentice on Boomerang. Right. The Hudlin brothers did. And I got that because I was the youngest member of the Black Filmmakers Foundation out of New York.
And how did that happen? You just joined.
So I just joined. My mom had worked with the Hudlin brothers some years before on some commercial. And so again, she's seeing that I'm interested in film and all this stuff. So she's actively like, well, is there things he can go to, meetings that he can sort of be around people, he can sort of...
Because that was going to be my next question, is how did you even know there was a Black Filmmakers Association?
My mom.
12
and so,
years old or
so we started going to some of those meetings, and then I caught the eye of the Hudlin brothers, and mainly because I was asking questions in the Q&A that people are like, what? Like, and what camera did you use? And why did you use 16 millimeter instead of 35 other than cost? Because this is coming out of 9, 10-year-old, and so they're just like, oh, okay, you're we want to be supportive of your growth, and they were hands down the biggest supporters. So they made me an apprentice, and that was my first experience with people being mad about where I was in my position. People were like, "Oh, why are you there? I should be there. You're just a little kid. You don't know nothing." Like that kind of bad apples in a barrel kind of a thing. I let most of it ride off my back because I was like, well, I'm not really here to be involved in the drama. I'm trying to get this work done.
Lessons to learn early, because some of the stuff that we talk about so much, man, and I've talked to so many of my friends about, is that the struggle of this business, this career, whether in all the creative aspects, but it's dealing with that, man. Yeah. It's like, it's not just dealing with your own ego, which you have to keep in check. It's dealing with other people's egos and how you're affecting them. And, you're talking about getting cut out of movies and all the it's a roller coaster.
It's a super roller coaster. We talk about being in the work, scoring something, getting a bunch of notes, getting, bar one rewrites of certain things that you spend a lot of emotional time on, and having to sort of go back to ground zero and being able to just be like, well, I mean, that's the job.
Right, that's
you just
got
to,
But what's interesting in your story is that you're learning some of these lessons at a really young age. Most of us, we only learn them as we get our first professional opportunities, which for most of us, you're gonna come in our 20s.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Come back to now. You're on Boomerang.
So Boomerang was like this amazing experience because I got to watch the Hudlin brothers basically create this classic, and not only that, but being around people like Eddie Murphy, who was phenomenal, and personally to me was very, very, very nice.
Was this like bananas for you? Or are you like? Or was it part of like just another thing?
It's just like part of the thing.
The path has been such a steady curve, or whatever the word is, that it was just the next thing. Oh, today I'm doing this.
It feels like it was just. It's one of those things where you look back.
There was no like, dude, I'm going to hang with Eddie Murphy.
There's always a bit of excitement, but there's the reality of it too. Of like, yeah, I'm going to hang with Eddie Murphy, but I may not get to see him. I might not get to interact with him. Everybody might completely ignore me because they're doing a job, like they're making a movie, and I'm just kind of like watching. My job is to be in the cut and not get in anybody's way.
You just had the maturity to do this thing that you were doing, because that is part of the maturity of knowing that you were going to work, basically.
Yeah.
But it's crazy because Eddie, I mean, that might have been the pinnacle.
That was peak Eddie Murphy, and watching him do his craft was by far, like, it was mind-blowing. I remember everything he was doing was just so beautifully executed.
By the way, now you're 14?
Yeah.
Boomerang happens, you get to go through that whole process, you get to be in the movie a bit as well.
Yeah.
The movie is huge. It is kind of a legendary, just a great thing to be part of.
It was amazing.
All throughout, are you making music?
All throughout. The music doesn't stop. The music is my first language, and wherever the technology is going, that's where the music goes.
So now we're coming up. You're 14. We got to be getting close to the Parenthood now.
Yeah. So the Parenthood happens after Tall Hopes. It was just another show that I auditioned for out in New York, and I got all the way to screen test in LA, where it was this brand new network called the WB, and we were going to be like one of the first shows, one of the first 4 on that network, and thus started the Parenthood story. And
This is where it gets really interesting, just to me personally, that ultimately you are doing the music for the Parenthood while you're on the Parenthood.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, when you told me this story many years ago, you didn't start out that way, right?
Right.
Okay.
So first season, it felt great and it was really exciting. I was really excited about the character that I was playing because
And Robert Townsend, another amazing,
iconic,
you know.
yeah. So it was all the things, all the check boxes. I think by the end of that first season, as Robert started to sort of know who I was and what I was capable of, I think it was like we had the rap party and they had a band there, and I went from playing the drums to playing the keyboard and sitting in with the band, and then Robert was like, oh, okay, like maybe we can take his character in a musical direction. And so I was responsible for doing whatever Michael's music stuff was. I was delivering that to the show. Michael's the
for
character.
anyone who doesn't know.
Right. So if Michael was, playing, if he was auditioning for some record label and he's playing a song, like I'd have to deliver that song. So I did that second season. I scored 3 episodes, and it was a lot of fun.
Was there a composer previously?
There was a composer previously. I don't know how that hit him, because it's like, this is my gig, and now that they want a cast member to start taking some of my episodes. I never had that conversation with him, so I still don't know.
Did you know him? Had you met
Didn't
him?
know him.
Yeah, because that's how it often is. The act.
The only time we would interact with a composer is if we had to come in and
Do a
pre-record. That's how I met you.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like that on the Parenthood. So I did 3 episodes that second season. Third season, I did half
Of the music.
half of the music, and then by that 4th season, I did everything, and then I did all the music. 4th and 5th season, they wrote me out of the show for 4th and 5th season, and that was a whole other thing.
But you're still writing the music.
I'm still writing the music.
And yeah, well, how did you feel about that in a nutshell, or not in a nutshell?
So I mean, it was a very. So we talked about how you learn these lessons on how to deal with ego and all that stuff young, but I think there is. The flip side of that is, because there was so much of that I was used to as a young person, when they basically were like, well, we're not bringing your character back for this 4th season. As the oldest son, we're not bringing you back. And my ego initially was like, forget them, like, whatever, I'm going to do this other stuff. But underneath that it was very painful.
Yeah.
And I was not aware of that pain for a while.
And just in terms of the time, and as a little aside from that, you're on the show and you're writing the music for the show.
Yeah.
Was that a grind, or was it just kind of fun? And
No, it's great.
It's great.
It was great. I think just my age at the time allowed me to not even feel it.
Right.
It got to the point, and this is one of my things is, so I get the tape and the cue sheet, basically all the places that they wanted music, and the show had this thing where Robert's character would have these fantasy sequences in every episode, and the fantasy sequence would be based off of some kind of like genre. So it would be like a fantasy sequence in the style of a James Bond movie,
right,
or in the Batman movie, or so every week.
This is the fun stuff for us.
This is the fun stuff,
right?
Yeah. So it's like every week you was like, oh, what's the fantasy sequence this week? All right, I got to do friggin' John Williams score. Okay, cool. Like, so that was fun, and it got to the point where. And I don't know if this was based off of my schedule or how the production was doing it, but I swear they would deliver a tape to me at 6 p.m. on a Monday, and then the mix was the next morning.
Mm-hmm. So that's to me, that's an extra really cool little thing that you did along the way. You've done a lot of interesting things, and because we're just getting into
the beautiful, and again, so doing the score again, like I feel like I've been blessed with people who've been very helpful and supportive. So on the Parenthood mixes, the guy who was the actual mixer on the show is this guy named Todd Grace, who was a big Warner Brothers TV guy, and he he was just super cool. Like I'd bring cues in and he'd be like, oh, you know what? You might want to leave more of a longer tail so then I can fade it down here or, and so I just learned so much
I've had
from
those experiences with those mixers too.
yeah,
Man.
like when you get really nice mixers who are like cool and who are just like, let me help you out. It'll make my job easier, but I'm not gonna be an ass. Like, let's make this all work together for all of us. So he was super super awesome.
Okay, so you do the Parenthood,
Parenthood.
and now, and by the way, we didn't even touch on this. I mean, you made one reference to it, but somewhere in here, you went to college and you were a film student.
Yeah, part time, because I was doing that while I was doing the Parenthood.
Okay.
And it was kind of unfortunate because they were not that flexible with me in my work schedule. So like, I remember I had a midterm on the same morning of a mix session for the Parenthood. And I was like, well, can I take it earlier? Or I mean, I was going there part-time, but that was kind of me going like, okay, I gotta work. I'm not gonna. Yeah. And then I was just like, I'm gonna choose work over going to school. So, because I just remember, I mean, it's like I didn't have any student loans because I was literally writing checks at the beginning of every semester, like USC checks. Very, very just.
I mean, you were killing.
I was working though. I was working.
I mean, you were on a sitcom.
I was on a sitcom. I was doing music for the sitcom. It was, it was one of those things where when you're that age and you don't, it's like you were asking me before, like, are you realizing how amazing this is? No. It's just how the things go, and it allows you to sort of look at things at each stage and go, okay, well, what do I want now?
But the thing that I'm really taking away as we're going through this, and I already knew this about you, but it's just great to even hear the stories, is the accumulation of just legendary cats that you got to share moments with, share work with, see their creative process.
It was amazing, and I'm eternally grateful for just the experiences.
And then we met.
Yeah. So it was sort of like, after like Parenthood, I was kind of doing more behind the scenes, trying to get my directing stuff going. I was still doing a lot of voiceover work because that was very fulfilling. And so I don't even remember auditioning for As Told by Ginger. I just remember my agent saying, you booked it and you got to go for the first record. And just it being such a complete different experience of voiceovers that I had done before, because we were doing scenes and it was just the interaction between the performers, and we do maybe 2 takes of a scene and that'd be it.
Right.
It was a great feeling. It was like one of those like, wow, I'm getting paid to play. This is just like play. This is literally play. And I remember seeing the character designs for the first time, being like, he kind of looks a little bit like me, like with the hair and the whole. It was nuts. I was like, wow, that's really cool. And so yeah, this one episode they had Darren singing a song at the end of it, and they're like, oh, we're gonna have to, we have a session for you with the guy who composes all the music. So you're gonna meet him at his house to record the song.
You're probably expecting like a real adult in a proper, and then I'm like,
no,
I'm like, what's up, man?
Nope, because that was the thing. Like I never assumed that. So I was more about like, I hope this guy's cool. I hope he's like a cool guy, and it's not some weird like uncomfortable
And now
thing.
I had heard about you because I don't know if I might have even been at a session you were at once, but not really met you, because it might have been at one of the voiceover records.
Yeah.
But I would always go there for the dub, and everyone on the show would be telling me, oh man, you should meet Kenny. He's done this and he's done that. He does music, and you guys would hit it off. And I think at that time you had done some visual effects.
Yeah, I had just done NSYNC.
For the NSYNC thing.
Yeah.
And they were like, yeah, he's doing this NSYNC tour, and I was like, man, I want to meet this dude. You know what I mean? I was like, and then I knew who you were because, of course, I knew the Parenthood.
Right.
So they were like, oh, he's the dude from the Parenthood, and I was like, oh yeah, I can't wait. That'll be cool. I want to meet him.
And the cool thing is, like, I already was like, all right, he's got to be cool because that theme song is like killer, right? And so I was like, the vibe is cool. Like the music for the show is like cool. So he's got to be like. So now I'm just curious. I'm driving up here in the hills, and I'm like, I'm curious to see what his setup was, and then we met, and we just. It was like instant.
Yeah, it was I was using Logic, and you were like deep into Logic. And you I think I was trying to.
I was like, like deep in Logic, and I had just recently been accepted into their beta program.
Right.
So I felt like, that for me was like the dream, to be maybe learning about some new features in Logic before they come out and being able to talk to the developers, and that was amazing. So yeah, so I was like super, super deep into Logic at the time. And yeah, I remember you in Logic, and I remember you you're having a rough time.
Emotionally and otherwise.
Yeah.
Right? Well, that's the interesting thing, man, because it's like you're trying to get the stuff done.
Yeah.
And trying to get, have your music approved, have your creativity, have the thing that's the most important to you approved
Yeah.
of,
I mean, just that word approved, because I was thinking like the validation, because you're looking for approval and validation at the same time. And it's kind of thankless, because it's like when it works, you're not really supposed to notice it.
Too much, right?
Yeah, so it's,
You're doing a lot of music at this point. So when I met you at this time and we start hanging a little bit, and I went by your place and saw your whole studio set up in your at your house, and then eventually you opened a studio in Hollywood, and you had a proper
build out and the whole thing,
and you were doing some records.
Yeah.
And you had artists that you were working with. Then at the same time, you were making some movies.
Yeah. It's funny to sort of see it like that, because I feel like I was really running on all cylinders at that time. And then I think just a bunch of walls just like pop, 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 one after the other. Just trying to get these indie movies made, and trying to get people to sort of do things, and then maybe there's like no funding and there's no money, but people get, they got jobs, they got families and stuff, so it's like that's harder to do. So there was like a lot of creativity and a lot of expansion, but a lot of disappointment in that time period.
And I imagine, given the conversation we've had now, although you've dealt with disappointment in limited areas here and there, but up until this point, it was a pretty steady, positive flow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now you're becoming an adult, because you're in your early 20s.
Early 20s, yeah.
And everything doesn't flow.
Everything doesn't flow, and it's getting a lot of people going, I don't get this. Like, this is, I think for me, because I was able to do so many things, when things got a little bit too difficult, I would just switch to something else. I would just focus on something else, instead of being like, no, I'm going to make this thing work. I think there was a bit of that tenacity when I was a kid on the acting front, because there were walls there too, but that's what I wanted to do, and I stuck at it. So that brings me to, when I'm sort of at a point with my music where I'm going like, all right, I've done all these different styles, I've done all this kind of experimentation, but there's something else that I want to get into. There's another layer, and I started to read about healing frequencies and sacred frequencies and sacred geometry and all that stuff, and 432 hertz, just all those things that I was like, I'm curious about that, and I want to see if I can incorporate some of that stuff into my music and see if it feels different, see what the hype is about. And quickly I realized like, there's no tools for this. I can bring up some Max for Live stuff and build these little sine wave generators and manually type in what the frequencies are and kind of do that, but that is taking me out of the creative space. Like, what if there was something that allowed me to work in these very specific frequencies with a database, that allowed me to add new things, that allowed me to combine these frequencies together, combine and use sacred geometry and ratios and shapes, and use that within the music process as a way to put intention into the music that's at a different level than just this Western scale. What would that be like? And 6 years later, I built the software to do that.
Right. You taught yourself how to code.
I taught myself how to code, and ended up building essentially a music workstation, synthesizer, sequencer, database that does all of that. And that has been probably the greatest creative experience of my life to date. And
meanwhile, throughout though, you also
I'm still working.
Have produced TV shows. You did movies,
feature
feature film
films.
on BET. You've been a showrunner, executive producer, all kinds of stuff. all the while writing music for these projects.
Yeah. And trying to figure out how to write a sequencer. That's why I loved beta testing and alpha testing, because I always wanted to get underneath the hood and make these things work in ways that they weren't necessarily designed to work. So to then be writing software to kind of do that on a musical composition standpoint. So that's super exciting to me. And you know, and also just again to be able to, like, how do you build a sequencer? How do you build a synthesizer in code? And getting very intimate with all of that stuff. I feel like any of these endeavors, it's like there's a little bit of sickness you got to have to put yourself through it.
I'm gonna wrap it up on that.
On
man.
that,
I think
sickness.
we went through it. I think we went through it. Dude.
Oh man, awesome.
That was